I had exactly $11.43 left when I started thinking about doing something that could ruin my life. The number stared back at me from my banking app while I sat on a cracked plastic chair outside a pharmacy in Queens. $11.43. That was all that stood between me and zero. My rent was due in 4 days. My electric bill was already late. And the prescription bag resting in my lap contained medication my 17-year-old brother needed to keep taking. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold brick wall behind me. Across the street, traffic crawled through the evening rush. Taxi horns echoed between buildings. People hurried home carrying grocery bags and takeout containers. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. A plan. A future. I had a part-time job at a diner. Another part-time job cleaning offices 3 nights a week. I attended community college classes whenever I could afford the tuition. Somehow it was never enough. The pharmacy receipt crinkled in my hand. I looked at the total again even though I already knew it by heart. Every number felt heavier than the last. My phone buzzed. A text from my landlord. Just a friendly reminder. Those words always sounded threatening when you could not pay. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stood up. The sky above New York had turned the color of wet concrete. Rain threatened in the distance. I started walking toward the subway station, calculating expenses the way I always did. If I skipped lunch for the next week, maybe I could save a little. If I picked up another shift at the diner, maybe I could cover part of the rent. If the universe suddenly decided to be generous, maybe I could breathe again. None of those possibilities felt very likely. By the time I reached the station, my stomach was tight with worry. The train arrived with a screech of metal. I found an empty seat near the back and watched the city blur past the window. Every reflection showed the same thing. A 24-year-old woman trying desperately not to fall behind. When I got home, my brother Mason was sitting at the kitchen table finishing homework. The apartment smelled faintly of instant noodles. Our refrigerator hummed loudly enough to deserve its own zip code. "How was your day?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Productive." He nodded, pretending to believe me. We were both getting good at that. Later that night, after Mason went to bed, I sat alone at the tiny kitchen table with a notebook full of numbers. I added them. Subtracted them. Added them again. Nothing changed. The math refused to become a miracle. Around 11:30, I finally pushed the notebook away and stared out the window at the city lights beyond the fire escape. Somewhere out there, people worried about investments and vacations and luxury cars. I was trying to figure out how to survive another month. And before the next 24 hours were over, I was going to come face to face with the choice that would change everything. The next afternoon, I reported for my shift at Riverside Grill 15 minutes early because being late was a luxury I could not afford. The diner sat on a busy corner in Manhattan where construction workers, office employees, and tourists passed through all day. The coffee was always too strong, the booths were always full, and the tips were never quite enough. By 3 o'clock, my feet already hurt. By 5, I had memorized 3 complicated orders and cleaned up 2 spilled drinks. By 7, I was wondering whether exhaustion could become a permanent personality trait. The dinner rush arrived like a tidal wave. Every table filled. Conversations overlapped. Plates clattered. The smell of burgers, fries, and fresh coffee hung in the air. I moved between tables as fast as I could, balancing trays and forcing smiles. Around 8:30, a group of sharply dressed men entered the diner. They immediately looked out of place. Everything about them felt different from the usual customers. Expensive watches. Tailored suits. Polished shoes. The kind of people who looked like they belonged in private restaurants with reservation lists instead of neighborhood diners. I greeted them and led them to a booth near the back. One of the men sat quietly while the others talked. He appeared older than the rest, perhaps late 30s. Calm. Observant. The type of person who noticed details. I handed out menus and moved on. The rush continued. Orders piled up. Minutes blurred together. Then, While clearing a nearby table, something caught my eye. A black leather wallet rested beneath a chair near the booth where the suited men had been sitting. I glanced around instinctively. Nobody seemed to notice it. The group was preparing to leave. One man signed the check. Another stood and adjusted his jacket. The wallet remained on the floor. My heart began beating faster. I should have picked it up immediately and returned it. That was the right thing to do. The obvious thing. Instead, I froze. The rent notice sitting on my kitchen table flashed through my mind. Mason's prescription. The overdue electric bill. $11.43. The number appeared again like a ghost. I looked toward the front door. The group had already stepped outside. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The wallet remained where it was, waiting. For several seconds, I could hear nothing except my own heartbeat. Then I bent down and picked it up. The leather felt expensive. Heavier than I expected. I slipped it into my apron pocket before I could change my mind. Instantly, guilt crashed into me. Every lesson my mother ever taught me seemed to arrive at once. I spent the next 20 minutes serving customers while pretending everything was normal. It was not. The wallet felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Every time I moved, I could feel it there. Every time someone looked at me, I wondered if they somehow knew. Finally, near the end of my shift, I locked myself inside the employee restroom and pulled the wallet out. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The first thing I saw was cash. A lot of cash. More money than I had seen in one place in years. Then I noticed a business card tucked neatly behind a credit card. And the moment I read the name printed across it, the blood drained from my face. Lucas Moretti. Even sitting alone inside a cramped employee restroom, I recognized the name instantly. Almost everyone in New York did. Depending on who you asked, he was a brilliant businessman, a mysterious investor, or one of the most powerful men in the city. Stories followed his name the way shadows followed sunlight. Some were probably true. Most were probably not. Either way, he was not the kind of person whose wallet accidentally disappeared without notice. I stared at the business card for several seconds. The expensive paper felt heavy in my hands. My pulse pounded so loudly that it drowned out the sound of running water from a nearby sink. Suddenly, the cash inside the wallet no longer looked like an opportunity. It looked like a disaster. I snapped the wallet shut and pressed both hands against my face. What was I doing? 5 minutes earlier I had been trying to justify keeping it. Now all I wanted was to put it back exactly where I found it, and pretend none of this had happened. The problem was that it was too late for that. The men had already left. The booth was occupied by new customers. The moment was gone. I slipped the wallet back into my apron and finished my shift in a fog of anxiety. Every customer seemed suspicious. Every glance felt accusing. By the time I clocked out, my stomach hurt. Rain still fell outside, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected light. I walked 3 blocks before stopping beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. Then I pulled the wallet out again. This time I looked more carefully. Alongside the cash and credit cards was a driver's license. Lucas looked exactly the way powerful people were supposed to look. Sharp features. Calm eyes. Perfectly composed expression. There was also a folded photograph tucked behind one of the cards. A younger Lucas stood beside an older woman, both smiling at the camera. The picture caught me off guard. It felt normal. Human. Not the kind of thing I expected to find inside the wallet of someone surrounded by rumors and headlines. I folded the photograph carefully and slid it back where it belonged. The guilt became even worse. This was not some faceless stranger anymore. This was a real person. I looked up at the rain falling beyond the awning. The decision suddenly became obvious. I was going to return the wallet. First thing tomorrow. No excuses. No delays. I even felt relieved after deciding. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. For the first time all evening, I could breathe. When I finally reached home, Mason was asleep on the couch with a textbook resting on his chest. I covered him with a blanket and placed the wallet on the kitchen table. Then I went to bed convinced I had fixed my mistake. The next morning, I woke up feeling almost optimistic. That feeling lasted exactly 22 minutes. Because at 9:17, someone knocked on my apartment door. And when I looked through the peephole, 2 men in dark suits were standing in the hallway waiting for me. For a moment, I considered pretending nobody was home. Then one of the men knocked again. Not aggressively. Just patiently. Like someone who already knew exactly what was on the other side of the door. My heart hammered against my ribs. Behind me, Mason was in the kitchen pouring cereal into a bowl, completely unaware that my life appeared to be collapsing in real time. I took a slow breath and opened the door. Both men wore dark suits. Both looked professional. Neither appeared angry. Somehow that made me even more nervous. "Olivia Carter?" one of them asked. I nodded. "Yes." The older man offered a polite smile. "Good morning. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you." I stared at him. "About what?" He glanced briefly toward the apartment. "I believe you already know." My stomach dropped. For a second, nobody spoke. Then the younger man added, "You are not in trouble, Miss Carter." That was exactly the kind of sentence people said before bad news. "Can I ask what this is about?" I said carefully. The older man remained calm. "Mr. Moretti simply requested a meeting." I thought about the wallet sitting on the kitchen table. I thought about the photograph. The business card. The cash. Every terrible possibility raced through my mind at once. Mason appeared behind me holding a spoon. "Everything okay?" he asked. Neither man reacted. Their expressions remained professional. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just work stuff." Mason looked unconvinced but returned to the kitchen. I stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind me. "I was already planning to return it," I said. The older man blinked. "Return what?" I immediately regretted opening my mouth. His expression did not change, but I could tell he had learned something useful. Wonderful. Now I sounded guilty and nervous at the same time. The man reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. An address was printed across the front. Midtown Manhattan. One of the most expensive areas in the city. "Mr. Moretti will be expecting you at 11 o'clock, he said. "Today?" "Today." I looked down at the card. "And if I do not come?" The 2 men exchanged a brief glance. Then the older one smiled again. "Miss Carter, we think you will." With that, they left. Just turned around and walked down the hallway. No threats. No pressure. No dramatic speeches. Somehow that felt stranger than anything else. At 10:45, I stood outside a glass tower that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The lobby alone was probably worth more than my apartment building. People in expensive suits crossed polished marble floors while security guards monitored the entrance with quiet efficiency. I tightened my grip on the wallet inside my purse and stepped through the revolving doors. 20 minutes later, an assistant escorted me into a private office high above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. Sunlight reflected off skyscrapers in every direction. The room felt calm, elegant, controlled. And sitting behind a large wooden desk was Lucas Moretti. He looked exactly like the photograph. Exactly like the driver's license. Exactly like a man who never rushed and never needed to raise his voice. His eyes lifted toward me. Then toward the purse in my hand. Without a word, he reached into a desk drawer and placed an identical black wallet on the desk between us. My blood ran cold. For several seconds, I could not look away from the wallet sitting on Lucas Moretti's desk. It was identical to the one inside my purse. Same leather. Same color. Same stitching. My mind immediately started searching for explanations and finding none. Lucas remained calm, studying me with the patience of someone who already knew how the conversation would end. Finally, I reached into my purse, removed the wallet, and placed it carefully on the desk. "I was going to return it," I said. The words sounded weak the moment they left my mouth. "I know." That answer surprised me enough to make me blink. "You know?" Lucas leaned back slightly in his chair. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers beyond the windows behind him. "You opened it." It was not a question. "Yes." "You looked at the cash." My face grew warm. "Yes." "You looked at the photograph." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Because the photograph is folded differently when someone touches it." For a moment, I forgot to be nervous. That was such a strangely specific thing to notice. Then reality returned. "Look, I know what this looks like." Lucas nodded once. "What does it look like?" "It looks like I took something that did not belong to me." "Did you?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes." "And yet you brought it here." I opened my mouth and then closed it again. He was right. I had. Lucas reached toward a remote control resting beside the desk and pressed a button. A television screen mounted on the wall behind him came to life. Security footage appeared. My stomach instantly dropped. Riverside Grill. The dining room. The booth. Me. I watched myself notice the wallet. Pause. Look around. Pick it up. Every terrible second preserved in high definition. "I knew this was coming," I muttered. Lucas did not answer. The footage continued. It showed me serving tables afterward. It showed me repeatedly touching my apron pocket. Looking distracted. Looking guilty. Looking miserable. Then another camera angle appeared. One from outside the employee restroom later that evening. It showed me leaving with the wallet still in my possession. Lucas paused the video. "Most people stop watching there," he said. He pressed play again. New footage appeared. The sidewalk outside the diner. Me standing beneath the bookstore awning in the rain. Looking through the wallet. Looking at the photograph. Then carefully putting everything back. Minutes later, I could be seen taking out my phone. Zooming in revealed something I had forgotten. I was searching for Lucas Moretti's office address. The screen went black. Silence filled the room. "You were trying to return it," Lucas said. I stared at him. "Eventually. Before anyone contacted you." Another silence settled between us. Then Lucas picked up the wallet and placed it beside the identical one already on his desk. "Do you know why you are here, Olivia?" I shook my head. For the first time, genuine amusement appeared in his expression. "Good," he said. "Because I would like to offer you a job." I honestly thought I had misheard him. For several seconds, I simply stared across the desk while my brain attempted to process the sentence. A job. Not an accusation. Not a lecture. Not a demand for repayment. A job. "You are offering me employment?" I finally asked. Lucas folded his hands calmly. "That is usually how job offers work." The response was so unexpectedly dry that I almost laughed. Almost. "Why?" The question came out faster than I intended. "Why would you do that?" Lucas glanced toward the city skyline beyond the windows before returning his attention to me. "Because character is difficult to teach." I frowned. "I picked up your wallet. And spent the next 12 hours feeling guilty about it." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Unfortunately, he was correct. "You were desperate," he continued. "Not dishonest." The distinction landed harder than I expected. For months, I had felt like I was failing at everything. Failing to earn enough money. Failing to protect my brother from stress. Failing to keep our lives together. Nobody had looked at my situation and seen anything admirable. Most people saw problems. Lucas seemed to see something else. "You do not even know me," I said quietly. "I know enough." He stood and walked toward the windows. The movement drew my attention to just how large the office really was. Everything felt deliberate. Organized. Efficient. The world is full of people who make good decisions when life is easy, he said. I am more interested in the ones who make good decisions when life is difficult. I looked down at my hands. Suddenly the room felt very quiet. What kind of job? Lucas turned back toward me. Administrative assistant. That answer surprised me. You have people with degrees applying for jobs like that? Yes. And you chose the waitress who nearly walked away with your wallet. A faint smile touched his face. I chose the woman who came back. Another silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Lucas returned to his desk and slid a folder toward me. Inside were salary figures. Health insurance information. Paid vacation days. I stared at the numbers for several seconds before realizing they were real. The salary alone was nearly double what I earned working both of my current jobs combined. My throat tightened unexpectedly. This cannot be real. It is real. I looked at him. You are serious. Very. For a moment, I could not speak. Images flashed through my mind. Mason's medication. Rent paid on time. Groceries without calculating every dollar. A future that looked slightly less frightening than the one I had been carrying yesterday. Lucas watched quietly while I processed everything. There was no pressure in his expression. No expectation. Just patience. Finally, I took a slow breath. When would I start? The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Monday. I laughed once, still unable to believe any of this was happening. Lucas nodded toward the folder. Take it home. Read everything. Think about it. I stood, clutching the folder against my chest. As I reached the office door, his voice stopped me. Olivia. I turned. Yes? For a brief moment, his expression softened. The fact that you almost made a mistake is not what matters. I waited. What matters is what you did next. And for the first time in a very long while, I walked out of a building feeling like my future might actually be different. Monday arrived faster than I expected. By 7:30 that morning, I was standing in front of the same glass tower with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and enough nervous energy to power half of Manhattan. The lobby looked just as intimidating as I remembered. Marble floors. Quiet conversations. People who seemed to know exactly where they were going. Meanwhile, I was still surprised security allowed me through the front door. My new office sat on the 26th floor. The space was modern, bright, and surprisingly normal. I had expected something dramatic. Instead, I found accountants, assistants, project managers, and people carrying spreadsheets. Most of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and training sessions. By lunchtime, I had learned where the coffee machine was, how the scheduling software worked, and that everyone seemed to respect Lucas without fearing him. That detail surprised me more than anything. Around 3 o'clock, an assistant named Rebecca stopped beside my desk. Mr. Moretti would like to see you. My stomach immediately performed a complicated gymnastic routine. 5 minutes later, I stood inside Lucas's office again. He was reviewing documents when I entered. How is your first day? He asked. Nobody has fired me yet. A faint smile appeared. Promising. He reached into a drawer and removed a large sealed envelope. Then he placed it on the desk between us. I need this delivered to our Midtown office. I looked down at it. Thick. Heavy. Unmarked. That is all? That is all. I picked it up. It felt heavier than paper should. Lucas returned to his paperwork as if the conversation were already finished. I carried the envelope downstairs, rode a company car across town, and spent the next 20 minutes trying very hard not to think about what might be inside. Naturally, that made me think about it constantly. By the time I reached the Midtown office, curiosity had become its own living organism. The receptionist accepted the envelope without opening it, and thanked me. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, as I turned to leave, she received a phone call. After listening for a moment, she looked at me with obvious confusion. Mr. Moretti wants the envelope returned. I blinked. Returned? Immediately. 10 minutes later, I was back in Lucas's office placing the same envelope on his desk. He looked up. Did you open it? The question landed like a brick. No. Why not? I stared at him. Because it was not mine. Lucas studied me quietly for several seconds. Then he opened the envelope himself. Inside were stacks of cash secured with bank bands. More money than I had ever seen in one place. My breath caught. Lucas closed the envelope and nodded once. Good. Understanding arrived all at once. The delivery. The return trip. The question. None of it had been about transportation. It had been a test. I looked at him across the desk. You did not trust me. No, he said calmly. I wanted to trust you. Somehow, that answer felt entirely different. After that day, something changed between Lucas and me. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to notice. The following week settled into a routine I never would have imagined a month earlier. I arrived at the office each morning, managed schedules, coordinated meetings, answered calls, and slowly learned how an organization of that size actually operated. The work was challenging, but for the first time in years, I was not constantly calculating which bill could wait another week. Rent was paid. The lights stayed on. Mason never missed a prescription refill. Every time I looked at my bank account, I felt a strange sense of relief that still seemed unreal. One Thursday evening, long after most employees had gone home, I was finishing reports when I noticed the lights still on in Lucas's office. Curiosity got the better of me. Carrying 2 cups of coffee, I knocked lightly on his open door. Lucas looked up from a stack of documents. You are still here. So are you. I placed 1 cup on his desk. I figured one of us should make a responsible decision and drink coffee. A faint smile appeared. Over time, I had learned that Lucas smiled more often than people realized. Most people simply never stayed long enough to see it. He thanked me and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city glowed outside the windows, thousands of lights stretching across the Manhattan skyline. Can I ask you something? I said. You usually do. Why were you carrying that much cash in an envelope? Lucas laughed quietly. The sound surprised me enough that I nearly smiled myself. I was not. What? The money was withdrawn specifically for the test. I stared at him. You created an entire fake delivery? Yes. That is an absurd amount of effort. It was important. I shook my head. You could have just asked whether I was trustworthy. People rarely answer that question honestly. Unfortunately, he had a point. I looked out at the city lights. So I passed. You did. Another silence settled comfortably between us. Then Lucas asked a question I did not expect. How is your brother? The fact that he remembered caught me off guard. Better, I said. His grades are improving. He talks about college now. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Good. I studied him for a moment. Beneath the confidence, the success, and the reputation, there was something surprisingly genuine about him. Most powerful people spent conversations talking about themselves. Lucas listened. He noticed details. He remembered things. Suddenly, I understood why so many employees stayed with his companies for years. A soft knock interrupted the moment. One of the senior managers stepped inside carrying a folder. He stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted slightly. Not disapproval. More like surprise. As though seeing me in Lucas's office after hours still seemed unusual. After he left, I gathered my things. I should probably go home. Lucas nodded. You should. I reached the door before his voice stopped me. Olivia. I turned. Yes? For a brief second, his expression became unusually serious. You know I did not hire you because of the wallet anymore, right? I frowned. Then why? Lucas held my gaze. Because every day since then, You have given me another reason to keep believing I made the right choice. 6 months later, I almost did not recognize my own life. The apartment was the same. The neighborhood was the same. Mason still left cereal bowls in the sink and forgot where he put his keys. But everything else felt different. The constant fear was gone. The fear of overdue bills. The fear of choosing between groceries and medication. The fear that one unexpected expense would send everything crashing down. For the first time in years, we were not surviving. We were living. Mason had been accepted into a college preparatory program. I had completed additional professional certifications through one of the company education initiatives. Even my landlord seemed friendlier now that rent arrived on time. It turned out financial stability improved more relationships than people admitted. One Friday afternoon, I received a message from Lucas asking me to meet him on the building's rooftop terrace after work. That alone was unusual. Lucas preferred conference rooms, offices, and schedules. Rooftop invitations were not part of his normal operating procedure. The sun was beginning to set when I arrived. Manhattan stretched endlessly in every direction. Glass towers reflected orange and gold across the skyline. A cool breeze drifted between the buildings. Lucas stood near the railing with 2 cups of coffee waiting on a nearby table. I was starting to think you might ignore your boss. I smiled. I was considering it. He handed me a cup. For a few minutes, we simply stood there watching the city. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Strange how quickly that had become normal. Finally, Lucas spoke. Do you remember the first time we met? I laughed. You mean the worst decision I ever made? Was it? I glanced at him. I picked up your wallet. And then? The question sounded familiar. I smiled despite myself. And then I brought it back. Lucas nodded slowly. Exactly. The city lights flickered on below us as evening settled across Manhattan. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Lucas reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed something. A black leather wallet. I immediately recognized it. You cannot be serious. The amusement in his eyes confirmed that he was. He placed the wallet on the table between us. I had it framed once as a reminder. That seems excessive. Probably. I laughed and shook my head. Somehow the object no longer represented the worst moment of my life. It represented the turning point. The crossroads. The moment everything changed direction. Lucas looked out over the skyline. Most people think opportunities arrive looking impressive. I listened quietly. The important ones usually arrive disguised as mistakes. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. Because he was right. Neither of us could have predicted what would happen after that night in the diner. A lost wallet. A desperate decision. A second chance. Sometimes entire futures begin with something small. I looked across the city one last time before turning toward Lucas. You know, if somebody told me 6 months ago that all of this would happen, I would have laughed at them. A rare smile appeared on his face. I probably would have too. The sun disappeared below the skyline. Thousands of lights illuminated the city beneath us. And standing there beside the man whose wallet I almost kept, I finally understood something simple. The thing that changed my life was never the money inside it. It was the fact that someone saw who I could become before I saw it myself.